Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this June 25, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our on-the-air light is on. A couple times we tried to sign on tonight. We got some error messages, but looks like we're good to go now. Opening story tonight comes out of Iraq, with Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri Maliki having rejected calls for a national salvation government as the battle with jihadist-led Sunni rebels for control of a key oil refinery continues. Before we go to our news anchor, let me just tell you that Mr. Maliki called on all political forces to reconcile, but made no promise of greater representation for government for the minority Sunni Arab community. Meanwhile, new pictures emerged of the battle for control of the Baiji refinery, which has been running for 10 days. The BBC's Richard Galpin says Mr. Maliki is keen to show that he will not be pushed into a decision by other nations or political rivals.
Basically, he's signaling he's not going to be pushed around by the international community, nor by his political opponents. I mean, I think the specific call for a government of national salvation has actually come from one of his political rivals, Ayad Alawi. So he's saying no to that. And I think he's also signaling that he's going to take his own time to create the government that he wants. And he's basically saying, look, you know, we actually did the best in the election back in April. We got 92 seats in the parliament, which is the largest number. And he personally, as Prime Minister in his constituency here in Baghdad, got the highest number of votes for a single politician by far, 3 times more than anybody else. So, you know, he's saying, I'm going to do it this, basically my way. I'm not going to rush into it, and we will do it as per the Constitution, which does give time for the government to be formed. But of course, what the international community and others are saying is precisely that there is not time. And one Western diplomat said to us that this should be done within a matter of days, not in weeks.
I think also, Richard, we've got some new pictures that have come into us in the newsroom here showing the attack on the oil refinery in Baiji in Iraq. These have just come into us. As you can see, the oil refinery there, which has been hotly contested between the ISIS militants and, of course, the army. Richard, I'm not sure if you can shed any light on the latest developments there regarding who's in control, because we've been hearing it's been very much being one or the other that has been fighting for this particular area.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, this battle has been going on for 10 days, which tells you something, that this is an absolutely key strategic site. It is the refinery provides it is the largest actually in the country, providing anything from a quarter to a third of all the petrol and diesel which is used in the domestic market here. So it's absolutely vital. And as far as we understand, the battle goes on, that nobody is decisively in control. We heard yesterday many sources saying to us that the militants were in control, and now it seems, well, it doesn't seem to be the case, that they are still fighting. The military certainly are still there as far as we understand it, and they are still fighting for control.
Friends, the ongoing conflict in Iraq has prompted speculation about possible coordination with Iran to defeat a common enemy. An easing of U.S. sanctions in exchange for some nuclear concessions has already allowed the talks between the UN's 5 permanent members and Iran to continue. But what would America's Iranian diaspora think about closer ties? Alistair Lighthead reports from California's Terangelis.
It's Persian comedy night in Los Angeles, and Tehran has the mic.
One thing Persians aren't
as terrorists. Like, that's the stupidest stereotype of all time. Because we all know to be a terrorist, you actually have to be on time for your flight, and it's impossible Persians to be on time for anything.
The terrorist stereotype has had Iranian Americans laughing nervously for years. But would better relations be welcomed here?
I'm not saying that everything that happens in America is right, but I'm definitely not saying that everything that happens in Iran is wrong. I'm just saying together we can grow.
This part of LA is known as Tehrangeles, or Persian Square. There are more Iranians living here than anywhere else outside of Iran. And so talk about closer relations between America and Iran have been really the focus of attention here, with many people in favor and many against.
We export a lot of vitamins, supplements, medical equipment, medical devices, and a lot of food stuff.
There's a huge market for American-made goods in Iran. Warmer relations would be great for American companies in general, and Iranian businessmen in particular.
There's a huge consumer population there that just is hungry for American goods. So they're just waiting for this to happen.
But there are big problems getting things moving. A long history of bad blood and Iran's nuclear ambitions among them.
I think there is eagerness on the U.S. and the Iranian side to culminate a deal, a nuclear deal. The problem is where we have our Tea Party, they have their Chai Party. There are in both countries significant weighty interests opposed to any sort of a deal between the U.S. and Iran. I'm still hopeful that the nuclear deal will be successful, but it's by no means a certainty.
One of those weighty interests is the Jewish lobby, strongly opposed to any deal with Iran, so you'd expect criticism here. But what's the journal's Persian community reporter writing about?
There's been a tremendous amount of shock and disbelief at the warming of relations between Iran and the U.S. because the majority of Iranian Americans living here in Southern California escaped that regime because of religious persecution, lack of freedom, lack of democracy. So they feel as if the administration's turned their back on the Iranian community.
The two sides won't now meet in the World Cup, but have been quietly talking about Iraq this week. First round stuff, though. Some way off the bigger prize. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Tehrangeles, LA.
Thank you, Alistair. Friends, I pulled a story that kind of comes off the back pages, so to speak, that I didn't use before when I pulled it, but I saved it, and I pulled it out to go over now because it seems to really relate to what's happening, and it's a story that didn't get a lot of publicity, so but it is one that I believe you should know about and be aware of, because this is happening in the background. It's happening. And some of the things that are brought out in this story are something that Washington, D.C. should be paying attention to. Of course, as I've said many times before, friends, Washington, D.C. would do well and be wise to be listening to elder statesmen like former Secretary of State William Schultz, who says when it comes to Iran, they will smile at you, pat you on, send you on your way, and stab you in the back. And this story, I think, will bring some of that relevance out. Let's see, what happened? There it is. That's the, it'll pop up on your screen in a moment. We're having some problems with our signal tonight, our equipment. There it is. There's the video that I wanted. The RIA Russian news agency quoted a source who requested anonymity in this story from May 22nd this year, 2014, saying that Moscow may sign an agreement this year to build 8 new nuclear reactors in Iran. It should be noted that until today, and today being May 22nd, the dateline of this story, Russia was only responsible for building 1 nuclear reactor in Iran, in Bushehr, in the southwestern part of the Islamic Republic. That's a picture I got on the screen next to me here in that area, that nuclear reactor Russia built. The previous week, Iran, now we're talking about the previous week to this article of May 22nd this year. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that the requirement to reduce nuclear enrichment was ridiculous, he said. He added that Iran's rights are a red line in the nuclear talks. Araghchi stressed that the character of the Iraq reactor will not change following the talks and that it will continue to produce heavy water. Earlier in the same week, in May, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stressed that Western expectations that Iran will stop their missile production were stupid and foolish. Friends, you see why I wanted you to hear this story, why I've saved it? Khamenei announced the mass production of ballistic missiles days before Iran held discussions with the West. And then I showed you the video shortly after they had their talks with the West, where a former advisor to the president of Iran, speaking in the Arabic language but on television out of Syria, sits there and says, boy, did we pull a good one off on the United States and their allies in this European talks thing. We told them about certain uranium we had at a certain level, and we agreed we would reduce the level of that uranium. But we didn't tell them about stuff we got under the underground that's got a higher rating uranium level than that which we told them about. And we're not reducing this other stuff. We're continuing to work on it. And if we get a bomb, when it gets time to negotiate again, then we're going to negotiate as an equal, as one who has bombs against the other one who has bombs. And now listen that they're talking this May 22nd news story. They're fist rattling. And it's like Washington's turning a deaf ear. They're hoping, maybe they're hoping nobody will hear about this story and others like it that show how Iran is just making fools out of the United States current administration. But then maybe that's what the current administration wants. And, making fools out of all the rest of us, so they think. But friends, really it comes down, like I mentioned last night, the bottom line is a country gets as its leader, especially the countries which are the modern day descendants of Israel and his sons and descendants modern day, we get leaders who reflect what the majority of the people are about. And in the United States, we've got people that have allowed the judges, I mentioned this before, allowed the judges to sanction same-sex marriage, which is not a marriage at all, because God is the one who initiated marriage and defines what marriage is. It's between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. And one time I asked that on social media, hey, when two of the same sex get married, how do they decide which one's the husband and which one's the wife? Well, the first guy that answered me came right back and says, question basically is moot because it's not a marriage at all when it's between two people of the same sex. And you're right, really, according to God's word, it's not. It's not even a get-go. It's not even on first base. In fact, if it's anything, it's the other way. Not only 3 strikes and you're out of the ballpark, friends. You get into that stupid stuff, but God calls it perversity. And he also tells us, when you don't obey me, in the blessings and cursing chapters, Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, he starts it out with the positive, saying, if you obey me, you get blessings galore, both as individuals and a nation. As a nation, I'll make you the head, not the tail. I'll make you the lender, not the borrower. One of you will chase hundreds. You'll chase off your enemy. Agriculturally, you'll have plenty of rain. Your weather, I'll protect you from natural disasters. On and on go the blessings. But if you don't obey me, God says, just the opposite. I'll make you the tail, not the head. I'll make you the borrower, not the lender. What is the United States today except one of the world's biggest debtors? I'll make you the borrower, not the lender, if you disobey me. And I'll break the pride of your power. Instead of you chasing your enemies will chase you, and ultimately it winds up in captivity. And just like ancient Israel, when they disobeyed God, God let them go into captivity. And in Ezekiel 6:6, a prophecy for the future, for the not too distant future, God says, if you as my people, you got to understand who we are today to understand this as a prophecy for us, and the United States is one of the two sons of Joseph, and UK is the other one. United States being Manasseh, UK being Ephraim. But let me just read you real quickly. Flip over to Ezekiel chapter 6 and verse 6. And let's see, Isaiah, Jeremiah, we're just about there. And Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 6. In all your dwelling places, the cities shall be laid waste, and the high places shall be desolate, that your altars may be laid waste and made desolate, and your idols may be broken and cease, and your images may be cut down, and your works may be abolished. Main thing in this verse, though, the first part of it, in all your dwelling places, the cities shall be laid waste. Friends, that's a prophecy for the United States. For in UK, you're not left out of that either. It's for you too, if you refuse to repent from disobeying your Creator. I'll have more to say about that at other times, but I've got a lot of stories tonight. We are going to go a little extra time to get these in tonight, friends. News you should be aware of so that we can be doing what Jesus Christ instructed us in Luke 21, verse 36 to do, to watch world events that relate to the seals in Revelation that he described in plain language in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And most of our news stories relate in one way or another to one of these seals. There is other criteria we look to. I'll share one with you tonight when we get to one story about where God tells us to be aware of witty inventions. I'm going to tell you one about today that's even probably more than what the old Dick Tracy watch phone was that we'd see in the comic strips that's being released for sale. I think the story will tell us next week. But going on with the news that we have here, and I may have to, I may have to switch these around just a little bit because I think I jumped ahead on one. All right, we'll find out. I'll either have it in the right place or not. At least 21 people have been killed in an explosion at a busy shopping center in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. The explosion was in the Woo's district near the popular Benex Plaza shopping complex and could be heard from miles away. And friends, I'm trying to line up that story. I think somehow I've got my... Let me pull this chart forward just a moment while I get up and take a look and try to figure out what... Oh, I know what. Before we go to this story about this explosion, friends, I have one story that I don't have notes for, but I want to play for you, related to Iran. And it relates where the West has warned Iran. Let me come back out of here. The West has warned Iran. Let's go to this story.
NATO foreign ministers in Brussels. Behind the smiles, no doubt about their main concern, the question of tougher sanctions against Russia. The body language was clear. The US Secretary of State firmly supportive of Ukraine, as the Secretary General of NATO backed new measures to help Ukraine's armed forces.
We endorsed a package of additional measures to strengthen Ukraine's ability to defend itself. This includes the establishment of new trust funds to support defence capacity building in critical areas such as logistics, command and control, and cyber defence.
Hopes that a Ukrainian peace plan would stop the violence appear to have been short-lived.
President Poroshenko has presented a very good plan, a very wise peace plan, including for dialogue in eastern Ukraine. But while there have been welcome words from Russia about that, we've not seen yet the actions to go with that.
The Ukrainian military, here guarding checkpoints in Slavyansk, accuse rebels of breaking the ceasefire many times. On Tuesday, they say pro-Russian separatists nearby shot down a helicopter, killing all 9 people on board.
This peace didn't bring any results. We just gave the guys on the other side time to reinforce their positions and bring in more ammunition. They didn't accept our president's plan.
Moscow claims to support the Ukrainian peace plan, and the Russian parliament has just voted to withdraw the right granted to President Putin to order military intervention in Ukraine. Only one senator voted against. On a trip to Vienna, President Putin also called for more talks with Ukraine. This is a crucial week for him. He needs to be conciliatory if Russia's to avoid stiffer European sanctions. Emily Buchanan, BBC News.
Okay, thank you for that report, Emily. And that report, friend, I meant to play that before I gave you the story about Russia building, and I introduced it wrong here, the warning, the West warns Russia. But I wanted to give you this story before I told you about Russia possibly signing an agreement with Iran to build them 8 more nuclear reactors beside the one it's built them already, and how they are thumbing their nose at the West and saying, thank you for releasing the sanctions, and by the way, we our former advisor to the president has said, look, we got stuff underground we didn't tell you about, and once we got this thing bomb ready, level ready, we'll negotiate with you bomb for bomb, and since we're real secretive, we might even send you one of ours, a little gift. And like former Secretary of State William Schultz said, they'll smile at you, send you on your way, and stab you in the back. And, zebra, not about to change his stripes. At least not before Jesus Christ returns. Jesus Christ may have some effective ways of dealing with people and straightening out this world, friends. But now, the story where at least 21 people have been killed in an explosion in a busy shopping center in the Nigerian capital, Abuja.
The explosion happened at a shopping complex called Emma Plaza in Wuse district of Abuja, and the area was packed with shoppers at the time when the blast happened.
Now, I'm going to stop him for just a moment, friends, because I mentioned to you earlier how we're having just a little problem tonight with some of our equipment functioning. That gives me a moment to mention this to you, too. I got one while I'm waiting on that to just change. I pushed the button already. You just have to wait for it to cycle. There we go. Boom. Friends, I do this program when Robert Collins was alive. I mentioned last night, just a brief mention for the record, last night was my 400th night to host this program since Robert Collins died, who was the initial host for the program. He died at 77 years old after having had cancer. Of course, he cancer went in remission on him, but he died 6 months after his wife died, and a lot of the brethren that knew him well, he was a 50-year minister in Alabama. He was always the second man for every lead minister that came into the area, and like some brethren said, wow, you know, he should have been a lead minister at some point. And of course, we don't want to second guess what Jesus Christ does, but you know, one thing about always being the second man on visits, everybody who came into the church in Alabama since 1959, 1960, from the time the first baptizing tours were held, Mr. Collins was always right there with the lead minister as the second man on potential new member visits. So just about everybody who came in the church in Alabama, for their first visit, they saw Robert Collins. And, you know, that goes for some more than 50 years. And then in 1966, he was ordained into the ministry at a feast in Big Sandy, Texas, by Mr. Herbert Armstrong himself doing the ordination. And former minister Richard Rice, who had been in Birmingham as the minister for a few years, joined in on that ordination, also laid his hands on Mr. Collins along with Mr. Armstrong at the feast in Big Sandy, 1966. I just mention that because to give some honor to the man who initially was the host of this program, who asked me to keep it going. I thought I could keep it going by finding somebody else to take this seat, and I could keep doing what I had been doing. Mr. Collins and I would work all day together, lining up stories, going over stories, saying, hey, was this worth the time on the program, and does it relate to the 6 seals and the 5th coming seal, and does it really fit in with, you know, the time span we have to show news? And so we'd work, and you know, are we finding everything? Back pages, middle pages, different publications. Boy, we were hunting things down, the two of us, all day long, and then we'd put it together, talk about it, what should be said. We'd line things up. He'd sit down with teleprompter notes, and which I helped type up for him, and then I'd run everything behind the scenes. And while he'd be talking, I could make sure everything was functioning and working fine, you know, and enjoyed doing that. And then, but as it is now, friends, I run this show, whole thing, work on it all day. I put it together. I sit here, run all the controls, and do the yapping, talking to you, and the whole 9 yards, all by myself. I would love to have somebody helping me with this and doing the part I used to do, and just watching controls and doing things for me, making sure we got all the levels right, everything lined up. If I miss something, they could give me a note or change my teleprompter script for me while we're even live, like I would do for him. And you know, and then if I get something out of order, just have somebody helping me would be nice. But as you know, for the most part, out of 400 programs, I goof up once in a while, but not too often. I think a lot of you probably noticed I handle it. Although it's, you know, it's a lot nicer when you're working with somebody that can help you. So if anybody interested in helping, you know, maybe we can work something out. I got lots of land here, place for you to bring your trailer, or I got a trailer, or you could rent one of these portable buildings that people convert into living quarters, and as long as you don't mind having a horse or a donkey and a couple goats around and things like that, and lots of cats. I feed cats because I like them to chase off anything that can come out of the woods that you don't want, like snakes or rats or rodents of different kinds. You know, they're good about that. Boy, one of my cats is ferocious. It even runs off other cats. This food, this stuff here is mine, he says. He does allow one female cat around that he likes, and together those two produce a lot more little kittens that I often have to run around and give away. All right, but this is a news show program. Let's get back to it, friends. I'm going to recycle that story now that you can see it on the screen. Regarding I gave you regarding the explosion over there let's go to the BBC's Bashar Saad Abdullahi in Abuja, where he says no one has claimed responsibility for the attack so far, but that suspicion has fallen on the Islamist militant group Boko Haram, which I mentioned to you last night, friend, has been kidnapping more Nigerian citizens, mostly girls. And they've bombed targets across northern Nigeria for years now.
The explosion happened at a shopping complex called Emma Plaza in Wuse district of Abuja, and the area was packed with shoppers at the time when the blast happened. When I arrived close to the scene, I saw smoke blowing from a safe distance, but when the police said it is safe for us to get there, I saw many cars burning, and I personally saw emergency workers gathering body parts into a body bag. And one of my colleagues who visited one of the hospitals where casualties were taken to said he personally counted at least 12 bodies and many more people injured in the hospital. At the moment, the police have sealed up the area, and they say they are still investigating and can't give us exact figures of casualties until they are certain of what happened and the number of people who are injured or dead from both hospitals that the casualties were taken to.
Bashir, briefly, do we know who carried this out?
So far, at the moment, no one has claimed responsibility for the attack. But in Nigeria these days, once we have a bomb blast, the blame immediately falls on the militant group Boko Haram that has been waging war against the Nigerian government and that has been carrying out insurgency. They've claimed responsibility for several attacks in Abuja before, but at the moment, no one has claimed responsibility for this latest blast.
Okay, thank you, Bashar Saad Abdullahi. I think I mispronounced his name earlier, but it's Abdullahi. Friends, our next story, North Korea has promised merciless retaliation if a forthcoming Hollywood film about killing Kim Jong-un is released. A North Korean foreign ministry spokesman said in state media that the film's release would be an act of war. The row could cause serious diplomatic problems with 3 American citizens currently held by Pyongyang. Nick Bryant has the report on this one.
To its American producers, it's a light-hearted satire. To the North Korean government, it's an act of war.
You are entering into the most dangerous country on earth. Kim Jong-un's people believe anything he tells them.
In the movie The Interview, James Franco and Seth Rogen star as a news team offered the chance to interview the North Korean President Kim Jong-un. But when the CIA finds out, it asks them to assassinate him.
You want to go kill Kim Jong-un?
Totally. I'd love to assassinate Kim Jong-un. It's a date.
The early reviews from Pyongyang are not just 2 thumbs down, but possibly a finger hovering above the nuclear button. A North Korean spokesman called the movie reckless US provocative insanity, which has produced a gust of hatred and rage. If the US administration allows the showing of the film, a merciless countermeasure will be taken. Some may think that the corpulent Korean is self-satirizing enough, his intricately stage-managed photo opportunities producing a string of viral moments. But the diplomatic fallout from this could have serious implications, not least because North Korea presently is holding 3 Americans in custody. For now, the gust of hatred and rage has created a cloudburst of free global publicity. North Korea's state propaganda machine has outdone Hollywood's most skillful publicists. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
Okay, thank you, Nick Bryant. And friends, next we go to a story related to Syria. More than 1 million Syrian refugees have crossed the border into Lebanon to escape the fighting in their own country. Lebanon's policy has been to allow all Syrian refugees within the country, but the BBC has spoken to one man who says he was mistreated by the Lebanese army. The organization Human Rights Watch says it believes a number of people have been beaten up in a room next to a checkpoint. Rami Ruhayem reports from Arsal along the Syrian border.
Stuck in Arsal in eastern Lebanon, Syrian refugees have become a majority here, and many of them have little hope of returning home soon. These mountains stretching into Syria have become a retreat for opposition fighters who fled the latest advance by the Syrian army and its ally, the Lebanese Shia movement Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the Lebanese army has deployed in and around Arsal as part of a security plan to contain the spillover.
Just a few curves down that road is a Lebanese army checkpoint familiar to everyone here. There is no way out of Arsal except down that road and past the checkpoint.
We met one refugee who was stopped at that checkpoint. Like many others, he had crossed over into Lebanon illegally, but he says he wasn't expecting what happened next.
Next to the checkpoint, there is a two-story building. They took me to a room on the second floor, which has some gym equipment, bodybuilding stuff. One of the soldiers asked me if there's anything new I had to say. I said no. Then they laid me down on one of the benches, and then it all started.
He says he was heavily beaten with sticks, cables and tasers as the soldiers tried to extract a confession linking him to Syrian rebel fighters inside Lebanon.
One of them said, "I have a new method." He put socks over my nose and mouth. Two others pinned me down, while a man started pouring water on my face. I felt like I was drowning. I had only seen this in films. I couldn't believe this was happening to me.
He was later released. We asked the army for comment, and they said all military personnel are subject to military rules, and that if the person in question believes he was harmed by a soldier, he may pursue legal avenues to claim his rights. But there appears to be more than one case.
We've documented one case in early May where a Syrian man was stopped at the checkpoint, taken from the van to a room next to the checkpoint. He was beaten, kicked, punched, electric prods were used on him. He himself saw 3 other Syrians get beaten up later on that day because they did not have proper residency papers inside Lebanon. So we know a number of people have been beaten up in this one room next to this checkpoint.
We called the army and asked again about the room behind the checkpoint, but they had no further comment. The soldiers at that checkpoint stand guard at a sensitive spot, where a front line of the Syrian war has edged its way into Lebanon. Some Syrians here have found new dangers where they sought refuge. Rami Ruhayem, BBC News, Arsal.
A 2.9 contraction in the U.S. economy has seen small businesses endure a major drop in sales during the early months of this year. Economists have been forced to lower their growth forecast for the year after the U.S. economy suffered its worst performance for 5 years in the first quarter of 2014, according to the latest figures. Michelle Fleury has the full report.
Collection, the double talk.
Casa Kids designs and manufactures children's furniture.
Bunk bed.
For this small Brooklyn company, the start of the year was bleak. Orders didn't return after the usual dip over the holidays.
The drop in sales was very drastic, and usually in previous years it picks up again mid-January, 15 days. This year took, until April.
The US economy shrank in the first 3 months of this year, hurting businesses like this and raising fears that the US recovery was fading. Still, many economists say it's misleading to suggest America is close to recession.
Yes, it was a surprising slowdown, but partly, again, it did reflect the fact that in the second half of last year, we saw a very strong pickup in growth that was driven more by businesses sort of restocking than it was necessarily final demand, and that, I think, inevitably meant that you had to have some slowdown at the beginning of the year.
But even if the optimists are right and America is bouncing back, economists from the IMF to Wall Street have been forced to lower their growth forecasts for the year. For many Americans, this report will feel like they've taken one step forward and two steps back. But there are signs that the world's largest economy is making progress, not least because of the improvement in the US labour market. Still, it's a reminder that the path to recovery doesn't always follow a straight line. Michelle Fleury, BBC News, New York.
Thank you, Michelle. Friends, let's go to our chart for just a moment. Let me put it on the screen and make mention that the next major event in biblical prophecy is the fifth seal of Revelation, the Great Tribulation, a time of the martyrdom of God's saints, a time of World War III. You know, we're just in a recess between rounds of World War, and we've had round two between 1939 and 1945, and now we're waiting for round three, which will revive the old Holy Roman Empire with its seventh and final head, which Revelation depicts as having 10 toes. Well, Daniel also depicts it as having 10 toes. Revelation depicts it as having 10 horns on that seventh head, those 10 horns being the same thing as the 10 toes of Daniel. And the seventh head being a new emperor that'll be crowned in Frankfurt, Germany, where most of the emperors have been crowned. And that'll trigger off the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation. And again, time of the martyrdom of God's saints, time of Jacob's trouble, which Jesus Christ described as a time so bad that it hasn't been as bad as it's going to be since the beginning of the world. And then once that most horrible time in the world comes, we'll never again have something as terrible, thankfully. It'll be that bad that nothing before it's ever been as bad, and thankfully nothing after it's ever going to be as bad. But that means it's going to be bad, because we've had some bad things happen. And if this is worse than anything else that's ever happened, and it will be by far. And but the in the news today, there's a story that relates to what I'm saying to you, because it goes back to June 1942, when a Czechoslovakian town was destroyed by Nazi occupying forces in retaliation for the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, a high-ranking Nazi official. The men of this Czechoslovakian town were killed, rounded up and killed. Most of the children were sent to gas chambers, so the kids were killed too. But the women were sent to a concentration camp, Ravensbrück. And one of the ladies, Jaroslava, I'm not going to try to say your last name, Miss Jaroslava, because I don't want to butcher it too badly. But one of the ladies lived in the town where this happened at the time and survived. She spoke to BBC's Witness about the time. Witness is a World Service radio program of the stories of our times told by the people who were there. And this video was produced by Claire Bowles and edited by Sarah Diaz. I think it'll be very edifying and meaningful for you to watch this and be aware of what happened in round two of World War. And keep in mind as you watch this, friends, we're only in a recess. Round three, which is going to be much bigger and much worse than round two, is yet to come.
The Germans came to our house at 3:30 in the morning. They were quite normal and said, "Leave everything just as it is. You will just be taken for 2 days to the school." But Dad had been in World War I and knew that something was wrong. As we went out, Dad said, "God willing, we shall meet again. Do not forget God." I said to myself, what's Dad talking about? We will be back in 2 days.
Achtung, Achtung. Amtlich wird bekannt gegeben.
Attention, here is an official announcement. Following the murder of SS Obergruppenführer Heydrich, irrefutable evidence has come to light that the population of the village of Liditz aided and abetted the assassins.
We had been occupied by the German army. Reinhard Heydrich was in charge. He was hard, awful. Our government in exile in England, including President Benesch, decided that something must be done. They decided to carry out an assassination. The funeral was on the 4th of June. At the funeral, Hitler said that the Czechs should be punished, that this sort of thing should not be tolerated. And they came up with an idea to wipe out a village. They started shooting the men at 7 o'clock in the morning. They brought in a cameraman from Prague so they could show Hitler what they had done. They made a film with the village already in flames, the church being blown up. Then they flattened the ground. 173 men were executed. There were around 300 of us, women and children. They called us into one of the classrooms at the school. We went in and they wrote our names in a register. An officer stopped at me and wanted to put me with the children, but he looked again at my date of birth, and that saved my life. I was put with the women and not the children. And this is the biggest tragedy of the whole Liditz story. On the 3rd of July, they let them write home. Those cards were stamped with the date 5th of July. But by that time, the children were already dead. They took them to Chelm, put them in gas lorries. They massacred 82 children. We women were sent on a slow train and arrived on 14th of June in Ravensbrück concentration camp. The whole 3 years I hoped that I would see Dad again and that we would once again be a whole family. When I came home, it was as much a shock as when I arrived in the camp. I should have been glad that there was freedom and that the war was over. But how could I be glad when my dad was dead? I returned to a funeral, not to a celebration that our republic is free again.
Okay, friends, I'm having a hard time speaking after watching that one. Let's go on, though. I've got more news for you I want to share with you. You remember last year we were showing you how Greece was suffering tremendously from near collapse at the height of the Euro crisis. But today, tourism has turned things around for them. It's boosted their country's coffers. But the question in this video is this: is a return to prosperity being felt by the people of Greece? Mark Lowen reports from Crete.
Where else does this better than Greece? Its pristine coast and warm welcome has led tourists to flock back. They're up 20% on last year and almost double 2010 when the financial crisis hit. And Crete is leading the way. A brand new hotel fully booked for the summer as worries about protests and Greece leaving the euro have faded, with the country slowly on the way up.
We make a new start. The things here are more stable as regards the political things and the euro and everything. So now they don't have a reason not to come in Greece. And there are many, many reasons to come.
Tourism is the biggest industry here. It slumped as Greece drowned in 6 years of recession. Now it's set to help the economy finally grow this year. But talk of recovery has its limits.
It was fear about Greece that drove tourists away from these beaches, and returning confidence that has brought them back. The government says the worst of the crisis is over, with the deficit slashed. But for so many Greeks struggling with sky-high unemployment and austerity, economic figures simply don't mean very much. And on the whole, away from this beauty, they don't yet see optimism on the horizon.
Okay, friends, that lady you see in the picture behind me, she jumped off of a wall 18 meters high and was attempting to commit suicide, but she didn't die from it. And she was even upset that they were trying to keep her alive. Her husband, appearing in the video here too, he feels the stress of the economics of what's happening to him. And, you know, friends, if the United States dollar is removed as the world reserve currency, replaced as the world reserve currency by some other currency, and if it's replaced as the petrodollar, or the petrocurrency, if the petrocurrency is no longer the petrodollar but becomes the petro-euro or some other currency, the petro-yen, the United States, our economic position could change overnight. You could see a lot of people, like during the times of the Depression, doing what that lady attempted to do. And I've got a story tonight on the economy in the United States I think you'll find interesting. We are going over time tonight. Let me get quickly to our next story related to things happening financially. Let's just be aware that in South Africa, the miners who were on strike for a good 5 months there, they've worked out a wage deal. And in this video, Namza Masiko gives us a report on the miners' first day back at work after a long absence.
The dust has finally settled. South Africa's platinum belt came back to life as thousands of mine workers reported for duty after being on strike for 5 months. They started queuing before sunrise, setting the sleepy mining town abuzz.
Now is the time. We have to push harder and harder up until we get something.
The signing of a 3-year wage agreement ended South Africa's longest and most expensive strike, but mining operations will not resume immediately. The workers first have to undergo medical checks and training to make sure they are fit to start work. After the all clear from the nearest clinic, the miners are expected to clock in for their shift. Johannes Tsolane works underground.
I came back home with Johannes Tsolane, and after working for 37 years in the mines, this house is all he has to show for it, and he's going on pension in 4 years' time.
5 months without a salary was tough, but it paid off in the end because all of us will benefit. Our pride and dignity have been restored, and we are finally getting recognition for all our hard work.
Okay, friends, and with the awareness of that, we're going to come on out of it, and then I want to go to a story out of Myanmar, also known as Burma. For years, reporting of acts of dissent were restricted by the military government in Myanmar, also known as Burma. But that's beginning to change. The long-suppressed story of a plane hijacked by Korean rebels in 1954 has now been cleared to be told. One of the hijackers spoke to the BBC's Jonah Fisher about the dramatic episode.
Refused to approve the plan. One of them called him a fool. But 60 years ago, Sojo A defied them all and marched into the cockpit of a passenger plane.
I said to the pilot, "This is your last warning. If you don't obey my instructions, this grenade will explode in 7 seconds." I removed the pin from the grenade and I showed it to him. I started counting, and when I got to 3, he asked me to stop.
Sojo A's plan was to steal the plane and use it to transport weapons for the Karen rebel group, who were fighting to break away from the Burmese state. These were the rebels who were supposed to be waiting for the hijacked plane on the ground.
I asked the pilot to fly to the rendezvous in our territory, but we couldn't find the spot. The other fighters were supposed to arrange a temporary landing ground and mark it with a big sheet of paper, but we couldn't find them.
So the mission ended in glorious failure, with the plane landing on a beach and the hijackers disappearing into the bush.
And friends, the long and short of that is they're going to make a movie on it. Listen, before we go, I'll make this an hour program tonight. I'll give you this story I promised to give you. Google has announced the first smartwatches powered by Android Wear operating system, which are now available for pre-order. Here's the story on that.
Really hoping to blow the market for smartwatches wide open, announcing today that they're going to make the Android operating system very easy for developers to make apps for these smartwatches. To tell us more is David Singleton, who's one of the leads on Android Wear, the platform that's going to be on these devices. David, first of all, talk me through what the smartwatch is that you're wearing there.
So this is a Samsung Gear Live, and you can see here that it has an always-on display, that at any given time is showing me whatever it is that I need to know right now.
How long does the battery last?
The battery lasts all day.
Okay.
And you can see that it combines information from Google Now, applications...
Which is your predictive service,
that's
giving
right.
information on traffic.
That's right.
Like that.
Applications running on my phone, and also applications like this step counter running directly on the wearable itself.
Right. Now, the market for smartwatches until now hasn't really been proven. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz about it. But so far, the only watches that have done well are really the kind of fitness tracker watches, not the all-encompassing notification engine. That's got to be a bit of a worry for you, hasn't it?
Well, one of the things I'm really excited about is that today we made a software development kit available for developers. And you know, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of developers working with Android on phones and tablets. And they're going to be able to use the same expertise that they already have to develop services for this new form factor.
But the thing is, a 2-inch screen is nowhere near as compelling as a 5-inch screen, which is sitting just a few feet away in your pocket for a lot of things.
Actually, for a lot of services, just being able to capture your attention for a second and then give you exactly what you need at a glance is really much more compelling. I find that since I've been using this device and other devices like it, that there were all kind of times during the day where I might have missed a message, or in fact sometimes my phone would ring in my pocket and I wouldn't actually know that there was a call coming in. But having my wrist buzz, be able to glance down and see who it is, has been really transformative. I've really enjoyed using it.
In terms of the execution, you showed off in the demonstration today the kind of syncing between phone and watch, but all the technologies have got to work really well. They didn't during the keynote, the syncing didn't, and also the voice recognition, that's also got to work really, really well, because if it's not compelling, people are going to turn to their smartphones.
That's right. The syncing works incredibly well. We also showed demos during the keynote of applications from a developer like All the Cooks, where I was able to keep the recipe that was on my phone in sync with the directions I was seeing on my wrist. We also know that voice recognition is...
Friends, I'm going to go ahead and come on out of that now. I wanted you to be aware of what's going to be offered, I believe, starting next week by Google. And some of you may be saying, Steve, how does that relate to the Bible? Your program is about news related to the Bible. Well, there's a scripture that says, take notice of witty inventions. That's certainly a witty invention, and that was featured by Google's engineering director of engineering, David Singleton, along with BBC's Richard Tyler. And friends, that's it for our report tonight. Thanks for joining me on this Wednesday night. God willing and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.